Great. Today on Lead with Storytelling, I'm joined by a writer whose work sits at the intersection of crafts, reflection, and lived experience. I'm so excited to have Simone Dalton join me. Simone is an author and creative writing instructor whose work has been recognized with the 2020 RBC Taylor Emerging Writer Prize for Nonfiction. She holds an MFA from the University of Guelph, and her writing has appeared in anthologies such as Watch Your Head, Black Writers Matter, and The Unpublished City. Her creative range spans genres from essays like Weight of Grief to her play Vows, which was staged by Rare Theatre. Born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago and now based in Toronto, Simone brings a perspective shaped by place, movement, and memory. Her work often invites us to sit with emotion, to pay attention to language, and to consider what it means to write honestly. Simone, welcome to Lead with Storytelling. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Sochi. Pleasure to be here.
I know we started off, talking about this our mutual friend who is now deceased, Sam Selvin, and it was a thrill to me to find this connection uh, because it's kind of sets the tone for my first
Yes.
question, which is what first drew you to writing?
Yes. Thank you. I love that this is where we're beginning because I wanted to take you back a little bit in my story. And I first started writing to create myself. So my father has lived in Canada for my entire life, and I started by writing him letters when I was about 6 or 7. And I wanted to be seen, to be known, to be loved. And of course, because I was a child that I also wanted to show off my penmanship and my, the new words I was learning in school. It was all about showing him the small and big details of my life. That began to shape what I would call my experience of language and identity. I didn't know then, of course, that it would lead to where I am now, but I have always been bridging or exploring those two facets. Growing up in Trinidad, my Caribbean schooling, English was paramount. You read and you wrote and you wrote and you read, and we studied literature extensively. And the interesting thing was that literature was often American or British. And the first two Caribbean authors that I encountered were Sam Selvin, whom you mentioned, and Jamaica Kincaid. So Jamaica Kincaid is Antiguan. Jamaica Kincaid, I think, was the door opening, taking me a step further. She showed me an Afro-Caribbean girl like me, in Annie John, who showed me that my experience was not peripheral, but it was central to the story. And it just gave me a place to rest the possibility down. Like I think, about 12 or 13 at the time when I read her book first. Savannah came later. Lorraine Hansberry came around in between there. And so by seeing these storytellers and seeing what they were doing as possible on the page, it just created in me a sense of what if, or could this be? I then went on to move somewhat in another direction, still as a writer, but as a corporate communications professional for many, many years, about 15 years. Always using the facility of writing, but now as writing for others. And I was telling other people's stories. And I thought that I was okay doing so. And then a grief happened in my life that just opened me all the way up again and brought me back to those early years of identity and language to make meaning, to understand what just happened. And so this was the death of my mother, which happened quite suddenly in my late 20s. I was living in Toronto. I had moved from Trinidad a few years before that. And that grief, it changed how I listened, what I noticed, and ultimately what I wrote. I started that story, which is now the memoir that I am preparing to publish next year, with just a paragraph that I kept writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting, just trying to, I was almost in this, like frozen in this loop, trying to figure out what was next. So that began to teach me about writing not to become something, but writing as a way of being, as a way of understanding self, as a way of how to make sense of a world, of an experience. And grief has stayed as sort of core to some of the questions that I have continued to explore in my writing and how I move through the world and in my teaching and coaching. It continues to be that quiet companion, to notice what endures and to honor what has been lost. So I would say that sort of follows the arc of where these small shifts came to sort of add up into this big moment of grieving and making a choice to pursue this story that then led me to pursue what was possible and to take me back to explore what a career, and actually I would call it more a practice of being a writer would mean for me.
Thanks for that. Because, and I'd like to. I mean, it's to me, listening to you. I see and feel. Sorry, I hear and I feel the amount of work, the rigor that you've had to go through. Because I have not. I'm not just seeing your experience or backstory as one block, different, not say seasons, but
I
in a
like
way,
seasons.
seasons, right? Yeah.
Yes, I do like seasons.
Let's go with that. Okay, let's go with
Yeah.
seasons.
Mm.
But it's also it seems also touched or impacted the moods in which you've written or chosen to write. And this takes me to some lines in your I told you before we started. I was just rounding up or finishing the Selvin and Me article, and there was this line in it where you kind of not intuited or but more or less questioned or interrogated Selvon's choice of modes in which he could assess his own archival moments and translate it into a work of his life. And you suggested a multimodal approach. And listening to you now, it's no surprise
Yes.
why you would make that suggestion,
Yeah.
considering that you have traversed different modes of translating your experiences or telling your story, from
Mm.
stage to life writing, and also fiction. So I mean, how do you make that connection between those modes? I think.
That's a good question. It almost feels innate. It almost feels to be sort of born with this rhythm. And I think it's something that a lot of communities of color share in the way we tell stories. And so when I am thinking of language, I'm also thinking of music. I'm also thinking of poetry. I'm also thinking of smell and taste. I could, and so those different modes, which is why I'm sort of practicing not being rigid with what a thing will be. Of course, as a publishing writer, you are sometimes asked to do something in a particular mode, but I am interested in how you can sort of open loops to other forms of presenting a story or an idea. And, although Selvan wrote a lot in fiction, I do know that his life certainly inspired what we saw on the page. Some will argue that fiction allows a certain freedom of the language that perhaps nonfiction may not. And I started in nonfiction, but my writing has pulled in the steel pan that I grew up playing, the way I watched the adults around me position themselves in telling, relating what was happening on the news. And so that's a play, as I'm watching. And then I have this experience of having these particular writers, as I mentioned, also in my archive are the Dickens and the Chaucers and all these other writers. And so, they have a particular way of managing the language. So all of that is what I get to play with when I sit to attempt something. And that rigor that you mentioned, I think is an important thing to almost come back to, because when I was stuck with that paragraph and wanted to go further with it, that's when I had to seek avenues where I could practice more, I could learn more, I could learn what it would take to bridge that paragraph with another paragraph and another paragraph, and be able to slowly build it into something more fulsome. And those moments were done, after work. You go to a writing workshop, and you kind of sit and you figure out what is there, but it all adds up. You're sort of looking for that snowball moment
Yeah.
when things start to make sense, and you see more of what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had, I was telling you about my experience with Selvan, and also had some experience with Jamaica Kincaid.
Yeah.
First time I heard her, heard or listened to her story, Girl, was
Yes.
the BBC radio show. I think they usually, they would, before, this was, ages ago, not to put an age, not to age myself, but we used to have this, thing where we would listen to BBC. I don't know how many people anyway, but we would listen to BBC, and this was when I was in Nigeria before I came over across the ocean to Canada. I was a kid, and BBC would play some stories, readings of stories, while announcing the BBC Short Story Prize. And then, people would then, just to get people, drum up some awareness for the short story competition. So that was my first time of listening. That was just a long time ago. The story came out around in the 70s, late 70s originally. But I could relate to that, and it's embedded in my memory because of the way it resonated, the story itself. with,
Yeah.
in terms of cultural experiences and
Yeah.
the voice, very accessible or relatable voice, which she wrote that. And it's got me thinking that, you were born in Trinidad. And then, of course, there's been a move, a migration to is as now Toronto. Um, has that affected your voice? I mean, how has that impacted your voice and your writing?
Wow. Yeah. Um, I think it's been Toronto is an interesting city. I still, to tell you the honest truth, I still don't think I know what a Torontonian sounds like because you walk. I live downtown Toronto. I'm not there right now, but that's where I live. And I walk the streets, and there are so many languages that are coming at you at the same time. On occasion, when I go out of the city or I visit other parts of Canada, and I almost jump because I'm like, oh, okay, so now I can pass and I think I understand what is a Canadian accent. Because in my Canadian household and in the household of my family, there is my father who left at age 16, went to London, England, then moved to Canada in his 20s. So he has this interesting lilt in his voice, mixed in with my uncles, his brothers, who came from Trinidad and moved to Canada, but had a different experience of schooling than he did. So they have an interesting version of a Trinidad accent, and then I have because of my schooling, and so it's all mixed in there. And when I first started writing, I actually made myself a little small because I wasn't sure how those voices, because I do believe that we all have a voice, and that voice is influenced by our experiences, our culture, our upbringing, and we get a chance to put it together and make meaning out of the different ways we might put it together and decide if a sentence will be long or short or how we will describe a particular sky or the weather. Um, but writing for a Toronto audience as I am and was, I first thought that the ways in which I would describe um, an activity happening or the way that a feeling might land for a particular character would be foreign. Even in this city where it is so multicultural and you're getting so many different influences, I was entering a new space and I had to learn how to hold my own in that space because that is the development of a voice. That is that perspective that sets you apart. It's because you um, deliver a line in a particular way that has a particular tone, that looks at an object in a particular way, or decides, how a character might move in a particular room. That's what makes you different from another writer. But it takes sort of a quiet introspection that I had to get to a place of hearing myself and seeing myself on the page and allowing myself room to breathe on the page so that I am not writing as I am based in Toronto and I have been for many years, and I am coming in with an experience outside of Toronto that is going to color what I see in Toronto, how I see it, how I feel in Toronto. yeah, so I think it was an interesting journey to sort of get to this place now. I'll tell you, it's a joke, and it's something that I think a lot of writers who are either writing in different languages or perhaps well, we have more versions of English in the Caribbean than British English, even though we were schooled in British English, but we have different Englishes. And I just submitted a piece, and I was going through the editing process. And there's a line that I use in that piece where I talk about chipping or to chip. Now, this is a form of dance, or the way that people in the Caribbean dance, particularly Trinidadians, when we hear calypso and soca music. And it is a literal shuffling of the feet. So if you see us carry banner for Toronto Carnival and you're seeing people moving along the lakeshore, you will see that motion. So I talk about going to that festival, and I talk about moving my feet in this way. And one of the editors said to me, I can't find this word anywhere. I don't know. I don't know what this word means. And, I credit him for at least not just totally wiping it out, but saying, I don't know what this is. And I was then given the opportunity to explain that in no way would I tell you I'm walking on Lakeshore. The only way I would walk on Lakeshore is to chip, right? So, but the writer who started 10 years ago, she may have not been as
Steeped
bold,
experience, yeah.
exactly, or as confident to say, this is how I move in Toronto. I hope that makes sense, but
It
that's what I feel.
definitely does. It definitely does. I mean, you speak to not just how, the voice is impacted, but also the kind of stories you tell, right? Because, even in the vignette you just painted, it's so much more about almost the permission that you need to tell these stories as well, right?
Exactly.
Um, and
Exactly.
it's saddening because you can imagine how many more stories are being suppressed because they are not
Yeah,
familiar, right?
yeah, exactly. We have and it's pervasive, a sort of narrow view still on what a writer is, even the practice of what a writer does and how that writer produces work for the page. And it does close the doors on so many stories. It really is. I think that's why I kind of started off with that. This is an identity shift, or this is an identity as to name yourself,
Assert yourself.
assert yourself. Exactly. That is work that I didn't realize that came alongside the craft, right? So that I could be bold and a little reckless and try something messy and be okay to try it again in another way. Like Sam Seven, I know it's going to come back to me in some other form. Then I get to tell that story in another way, another time. But yeah.
And I want to expand on what you said earlier about how feelings land, in the stories that are being told on the page, how this is someone expressed land on the page. And how do you, in this, you could draw on your experience now as a coach. How do you, um, not say teach, but guide writers to deal with emotions on the page?
Hmm.
I mean, it's kind of like twofold, isn't it? So you
Yes.
have in the form of a craft, how do you express or
Yes.
bring it forth, give it life? But
Yes.
also how it's then the flip side is in doing so.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you played kind of the role of a therapist in that. I can't imagine how many of your clients would must have cried, when after relating these stories. Well, you see that
Yeah.
it's not just so much it's so, as much as how you put the emotions on the page, as you also deal with them while you're doing so. So it's you give and you
Yes.
take.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a
Sorry about
good.
that in advance, for all the
No,
pain.
no, no. No, this is a really good this is a really good question. Wow. So, I think a lot of times when a writer is wrestling, and as I wrestle with bringing emotions onto the page, what we are in fact wrestling with is um, often looks like self doubt. It looks like comparison to other writers. It might look like time anxiety because the the first draft is, and you may have heard other writers say this, is often you telling the story to yourself, right? What happened. And it is really pretty on the page. But that can often create a schism for writers because they are imagining another version of the thing before it has presented itself. And sometimes the vision that they're imagining, it also closes off what it actually could be. So my work is about how do you return to the page and allow the page space to breathe, to sit, to try, to fail, and to try again. Um, when I was thinking of this idea of developing a voice, and to develop itself means literally to unwrap or to unfold or to reveal a meaning. That does not happen overnight. Um, and the way it can only happen is to write and to write some more and to write some more. But what I work on is how do you build up the resilience to go back to a thing that hasn't quite told you what it wants to be yet. It hasn't quite given its shape away to you. And, it's the page is a tricky thing because I almost feel like sometimes it holds itself back if it doesn't see you, if it knows it doesn't have your full attention.
I agree. I agree.
Right? So here you are just
Just
dropping
dropping
in
in. Yeah.
and expecting it to perform, and it's going to sit back and be like, wait a minute. Are you really here? Like, are you ready to listen? Are you ready to try something? Sorry, to try some things and to experiment and to see if I were to move this here, what would change the mood of this thing or change the way this thing feels. So that is my guidance. That is my work, is to help you build that resilience, to see, um, to look at what may seem ugly at first, but to trust that with the return, you can get it to open up and see things that you were not able to see before.
I love how you said, it's a tricky thing. And and you had this interesting choice of metaphors, right? So you have, yeah, of course, the feelings, you have the page, and yet somehow, hovering over these two or more metaphors is the subject of truth. I mean, I've only come into loving life writing. It's quite a recent thing, and
Yeah.
I can't even remember when it changed, because my first love, of course, is fiction,
Yeah.
fantasy, whatnot, literary fiction and whatnot. But in finding or stumbling into life writing and and um and all the fine works that I've read, and some of them very, very interesting use of technique, of literary techniques, it begs a question, right? And this is, backing on your reference to the page and how very tasking. What is truth? I mean, if I'm allowed, if I have license to mold, right, the way in which and the language in which I write the truth, is the truth then in that case still the truth, or is it my truth? I mean, what does truth mean to you? Is it just a feeling that you come away with, which again makes truth in that case very fickle, doesn't it? I mean, what do you think?
I think I agree with you that it can be a fickle thing. I mean, memory is because when we're talking life writing, you're talking about working in memory, and we know um, just how um, inconsistent it can be and unreliable it can be, I and yet I think the difference there is a lot of choice making in life writing because the role of a memorist is not to um, write to you or present the autobiography of their life, but they are shaping an experience to have that experience land in a way that invites feeling, slows the reader down, uh, creates recognition. And so let's imagine for a second that we have sort of a prism. So you're trying to make a decision on which part of the event are you going to show the story from. And that leads me to say then that it is the truth that the writer is choosing to present. It is not a what's the word? All encompassing, or it's an absolute, right? It's not an absolute truth. It is a truth of an experience, of that writer's experience, of that writer in that moment, how that writer was at that time, and who the writer is now that is writing the story and presenting this perspective. So I find it and I have wrestled with this because you end up when you are in the first throes of a draft where you're sort of trying to perhaps create a bit of an arc of a timeline, or these are the events that you want to work with, and you start to realize how many holes there are in that timeline. Did this happen when? So, I'll share with you, because I'm in the throes of this right now as I work on this substantive edit, which is requiring me to look at the structure of the memoir and make certain choices so that the logic is clear for the reader. And one of the things one of the bits of material I was working with was I call it the funeral sequence. So this is the period of time when I leave Canada, land in Trinidad, and I'm there making preparations for my mother's burial. And I realized not that long ago that I had sort of tacked on 2 extra days in this timeline. And part of it is that recognition that I did so much in a short space of time. And what that gives me an opportunity to do is actually reflect on what it means to have a parent die in one country and have to fly into that country to deal with the grief of that death. And what is asked of so many of us who are immigrants to, we're speaking of Canada in this case, but wherever we are. And even so many more of us who cannot be there at all. So that then the truth of that experience, it almost creates another doorway for me to explore. And so we're always, so we're making a lot of choices. The truth is not absolute, but how can we use that truth to bring the reader closer to the emotional truth of the experience of this very universal thing, which is dealing with a death in my case, as a story that I'm telling, but whatever that story is that we're presenting. So that is it's been interesting to watch how that changes.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree with you on how fickle it can be, but then it's also humbling to know, especially when when you find yourself in the privileged position of being the teller of that story. It can be humbling to know that this is my perspective of this story. This is my interpretation, and being open to those while you're going through the throes of revising,
Yes.
revising those parts of the story, being open to those other interpretations as well. And I think that gives depth to most of very good life writing.
I think that's such an important point, that idea of giving yourself permission or allowing what you thought was the story to continue to teach you or to show you what the story in fact is, because you may have a perception of what you think, and it will close off the depth of where you can actually present something that's potentially that just connects with so many more hearts and people and changes your relationship with them.
Yeah. I know I want to be very respectful of your time, but there seems so much to unpack. And well, I have just 2 questions. So the first of the 2 would be, how especially in your work as a guide and as a coach, how do you help your writers to trust their voice? Because it seems so important, especially if you take on a behemoth as your feelings or your past, and especially if it's one that has so much pain in it.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's sometimes I've had experience where I've used sort of a two-part process where the work or the page, as we return to it, is going to provide us with deeper questions. And we want to pay attention to those questions and attempt to explore them, to be curious about why they're showing up. So if you present 5 or so pages of a work, and I usually hear this question that sort of says, I'm thinking, but I don't know. Well, then you find out, right? That thing that you're just not, I'm thinking of, or I don't know, like that is the thing you want to grab onto. And every time that happens, you want to just unpack it a little bit and see what it's trying to tell you, whether or not it goes into the manuscript or whatever you're working on, or the story, or the what you're exploring. But you starting to peel back those layers, and that is starting to build the trust. That is you starting to learn your instinct of what makes sense for the story's progression, of what is just something you needed to park but pass through, or something you can actually pull in and use. But if you start like no, and like just telling yourself no and not being curious about it, you are sort of you're in this vice that doesn't allow you to see what's there. So sometimes I would recommend that a writer actually keep a journal alongside the work that they're working towards, so that they're somewhere safe that they can kind of have their mind run. And sometimes there might be a line that they might come across that might excite them. And then you might be able to pull that line into the thing that you're working on. But there is a lot of anxiety that can creep up in the process of working on the thing. And so, how can you find ways to release that anxiety? To first notice it, not try to dampen it, but to allow it, sometimes just the space to just let it run and clear it through the system. I know it's going to sound very woo perhaps, but I do believe that you're in relationship with not just the text, but with yourself as you're moving through. So the trust building is an inner work, inner practice that is happening as you are attempting to practice something on the page level.
What does storytelling mean to you? Does it matter?
I think stories can really help us to make meaning and remain human. I recently have been reading in my own practice as I'm writing. I tend to read a lot of poetry. And I am looking at the poetry of Tracy K. Smith currently. She was the US Poet Laureate, I think it was in 2017. And she talks about storytelling as this invitation, this thing that says, to quote her, come here. That to me is where the recognition is possible, that you can see my experience in your experience. And by extension, empathy is possible in that holding of each other's stories, so that they are not luxuries, but the way we metabolize experiences. And when we, regardless of whether we want to publish, and this is the thing that I try to share with any writers I come across, because in my view, a writer is not someone who publishes. A writer is a person who writes and experiences the world in language.
Thank you.
So, with that, anyone who experiences the world in that way can tend to a creative life that allows them that ability to do that. And that is not being indulgent, but is actually responsible to this human experience. That's what stories mean for me.
You don't know how much that meant to me. I don't know if you felt the kind of
I felt,
yeah,
I, felt
like oh my god, I felt seen. Oh my god.
I felt the exhale.
Oh my god. I'm like, yes, somebody said it finally. Oh my god. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you. Oh, we're holding a placard up now. Like, that was a great moment. Oh my god. Uh, uh Simone, thanks for that. But before I won't let you go, just not quite yet.
Yes.
We do have a tradition um of sharing rapid fire questions. 5
Okay.
rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You ready? You-
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Morning writing or late writing?
Morning.
Okay. Pen and paper or laptop?
Pen and paper. Oh my goodness.
Coffee, tea, or something stronger?
Coffee.
Okay, I just gave that up recently.
Or you just give it up?
Like
Oh, we're good.
I was, yeah, I felt like I'd taken. Okay, there's a rabbit hole and probably a conversation for another day. But nah, you know what?
Too
You
much.
like coffee? See you later.
You know, I'll say one thing very quickly. Canada made me a coffee drinker.
Oh,
I was a tea drinker for all my years before coming to Canada. But you cannot find a good cup of tea outside of your house in most places in Canada, in my opinion.
I agree, but almost the same thing could be said about coffee.
Well, now I know where to go.
Unless it's like gourmet coffee or something like that.
Right, right. Now I know I have little cafes that I go and I know more about where I can go for a good cup.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Beach or mountain?
Mountain.
Okay. All right.
I know that might have surprised you because I'm from the Caribbean.
Yeah. Yes.
But Trinidad has a mountain range, so
Well, I would definitely go for mountain because my mom has always told me we don't have water where we come from, and that would sound strange to if you're not from Nigeria. That would
yes,
sound strange to you.
yes.
It carries a lot of weight and a lot of it's cautionary, meaning.
I heard it. I definitely heard it. Before you even said it, I heard it.
And lastly, if there was a historical figure, writer or not, that you would love to, dead or not, who you would love to have lunch with, who would it be?
Alive, Jamaica Kincaid. She's alive. Thankfully, we still have her. And I would be so nervous, but I would, I don't know what I would do with myself to have that conversation with her one on one. Yeah.
I can't remember if it was her. I suspect it was her, not a
Mm-hmm.
Danticat, who I saw at a recent um, um, Women's Prize event.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I think it was her. And hearing her, seeing her, and hearing her speak, it sounded almost intimidating. So I could almost understand that feeling. She was, she sounded very assertive,
Yes.
and
Yes.
she was like a Toni Morrison. She's like no nonsense,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
She has this anti figure, like
Yes.
it was her anti
Yes.
kind of aura, like, you know, besides out beyond just, you know, talking about craft and knowing what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But you also have to be very respectful when you're asking me a question.
Exactly. 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 And that's my upbringing.
Exactly, my too.
So,
About my trauma.
exactly.
About my trauma. I had an auntie once. I mean, she thankfully she's still alive. And when we were growing up, she would, when she visits, you would fear her more than you fear your mom. And my experience with her, once she asked me to get her a cup of water. So I ran to the kitchen, I got a cup of water, and I came with a cup of water in my left hand. And I gave it to her. Sorry, not in my left hand. I no, it was definitely my right hand. But I put my finger on the tip. I held it by the tip of the glass. And I gave it to her, and she said, "Thank you. Please, can you go back and get me another cup of water?" And I went back and I did the same thing. I brought it. I came back with holding the cup like right on the tip, by the tip. And she said, "Okay, please go back and get me another cup of water." And when I came back the third time, she said, "Do you know why I've been asking you to go back?" And I said no. And then the next thing I knew, she gave me a knock on the head and knuckle punch. Boom. They're like, "You do not serve people with water in this way." My mom was there. And I know Canadian parents would think that was abuse. It wasn't. It was, to us, it was training. My mom was there. She saw
Yes.
everything. She
Yes.
witnessed it, but she couldn't say a word.
Mm-hmm.
People don't even look to my mom for salvation. That
There's no salvation.
no. And I got my first, not my first, but one. I got a good lesson there in how to serve, in etiquette, how to serve your
Yeah.
guests. And then I
Yeah.
finally got the water and brought it the right way. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, my mom comes after she leaves, naturally, and says, "I hope you learned your lesson. I hope you learned your lesson." Where were you? So I get that. That's part of my that's part of my trauma. It's just fun.
Oh my goodness. I loved it. I loved it. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. That's, you see, so that image, that's the start of something.
Yeah, of course.
That's the start of something.
Simone, this was fun. And
It was.
I do hope you come, you know, grant me audience next time when your book comes out.
Oh,
Uh,
I would love that.
you're working on it, and you know we get the privilege of reading your story and your work. Thank you so much for granting me audience here and sharing your insights, your expertise, and your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Sochi. It was very fun.